Welcome to my channel. I hadn't planned on going to the coast that weekend. In fact, I hadn't planned much of anything lately. My days blurred into one another, meals, for one conversations that died mid-sentence. A marriage that felt more like a room I couldn't leave than a relationship I chose. So when Daniel, my 20-year-old son, suggested a spontaneous beach trip, I said yes. Without thinking, we drove in silence for hours. The kind of silence you don't notice until it stretches too long. The gray clouds hung low over the coastline, and the wind carried the kind of chill that pressed straight through to the bones. But when we arrived, something about the sea seemed to soften us both. I caught a rare smile on his face as we stepped out onto the sand. He said he was going to walk along the water. I stayed behind, settling on a bench not far from a weathered cafe. The waves crashed with a steady rhythm, and I stared out at them, trying to remember the last time I felt genuinely at peace. That's when I first saw her. She appeared suddenly, like she belonged to the ocean itself. Young, maybe 19, slim, with sun-kissed hair and a dress too light for the wind. She was laughing at something Daniel had said, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. There was an instant chemistry, unmistakable. Even from a distance, I felt something twist inside me. I didn't know what it was then. An hour passed then, too. I saw them disappear down a path beyond the dunes. Her hand grazing his arm. I told myself not to worry. He was an adult, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I stood stretching stiff limbs and walked toward the cafe. The smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee wrapped around me like a forgotten comfort. The boy behind the counter looked up, and for a second, I didn't know what to say. He had warm hazel eyes and a disarming smile. Confident but kind. 23 may be too young for me, but something in his gaze paused me. "You look cold," he said. Already reaching for a fresh cup on the house. "You look like you need it." I laughed, surprised by my own voice. "That obvious, is it?" He nodded, just a little. We talked more than I expected. His name was Ethan, studying art in London, working the summer in this tiny town to escape the city noise. He spoke like someone who hadn't learned cynicism, yet it was refreshing, dangerous. As I walked back toward the shore, the coffee warming my hands, I glanced at the path Daniel and the girl had taken. Still no sign of them. My heart beat a little faster. There was something about that day I couldn't name, a current just beneath the surface. I told myself nothing was happening, that I was reading into things, but deep down I felt it. This weekend was going to unravel something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. The next morning, Daniel was already gone when I woke up. I spotted his shoes missing by the door, and a note scribbled on a napkin, "Went for a walk." No mention of where or with whom, but I didn't need to ask. I already knew. I got dressed and walked to the cafe, not for the coffee this time, but because I hoped Ethan would be there. He was that same easy grin, that same curious look when he saw me approach back for another cup. He asked, I just smiled. He handed it over without waiting for an answer. We sat at a side table. Our conversation picked up where it left off. No awkwardness, no expectation. Just two people slipping into something neither of us named. He told me about his childhood, how he never really knew his father. I told him about the ache of a marriage that once had warmth, but turned to quiet. We didn't talk like strangers. We talked like people who already knew how it would end but wanted to live the middle anyway. I didn't ask about his age, and he didn't ask why I looked so tired around the eyes, but he noticed, and that mattered. He said, "I look like someone who forgot she was still allowed to be looked at." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true, and hearing it shook something loose. Daniel didn't return until late that afternoon. His shirt was wrinkled, hair tangled, and he looked like someone who'd just discovered something powerful and confusing all at once. I wanted to ask if he'd been with her, but I didn't. He didn't offer. We sat in silence in the rented cottage that evening, eating takeaway. Two people sharing secrets with their silence. The following day, I saw them together again. Daniel and the girl, they were walking ahead of me along the pier, his arm brushing hers, her laugh far too familiar, but this time, something was off. Daniel kept looking around, checking behind him. She seemed to be leading the pace. Then suddenly she pulled away and he grabbed her wrist. They exchanged heated words I couldn't hear, and then she stormed off. He stood frozen for a moment before turning sharply and walking the opposite direction. I found myself walking straight to the cafe again like muscle memory. Ethan was closing up early, he said without asking why I looked shaken. Let's walk. We walked along the shore as the sky bled orange and gray. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. I could feel every unspoken word between us. My heart beat loud in my chest, louder than the waves when he finally did touch my hand. It wasn't bold. It was tentative, like he was afraid to ruin the quiet, but it changed everything for the first time in years. I let myself want someone, and I didn't feel ashamed. What I didn't know was that Daniel had secrets too, that we were both hiding pieces of ourselves behind calm faces, and the deeper we sank, the more fragile our truths became. Daniel changed after that day. He started avoiding eye contact, speaking less, and disappearing for hours without explanation. I stopped asking where he went. I was in no position to demand honesty. I was hiding just as much every night. I told myself I would end things with Ethan every morning. I found myself waiting for his message. Ethan and I met in quiet places behind the cafe, near the rocks past the dunes, places the wind could carry away our names. He kissed me like he'd been waiting for me his whole life. It was reckless. It was wrong. It felt like breathing again one evening. As Ethan and I sat beneath the cliffs, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, a flash, someone watching. I turned quickly, but whoever it was had already gone. My heart pounded, not from guilt, but from fear. Fear of what would happen if Daniel found out. Or worse, if he already knew the next morning Daniel was pale quiet. I asked if he was okay. He shrugged. She's gone, he muttered. I asked who. He didn't answer. I already knew it was Laya. She left a note. He finally said I was too intense, said I scared her. He paused. I never touched her like that. I never even got the chance. I didn't know what to say. My son had fallen in love with a ghost of a girl, someone who walked into his life and pulled a piece of him away. I could see it in his face. He didn't understand why it hurt so much. He didn't know how to process the betrayal. I thought she felt something, he whispered. But I was just convenient. I swallowed hard. How do you comfort your son when you're doing the exact thing he's hurting from later that day? Ethan seemed nervous when we met. He paced, then he stopped and looked me dead in the eye. There's something you should know, he said. I didn't want to say anything, but I think I saw your son a few days ago when we were... He trailed off embarrassed. My throat dried. We're by the cliffs. He was far away, but he stopped like he recognized you. My mind spun. Did Daniel see us? Did he already know and was pretending not to? Was his heart break, even about the girl or about me? I didn't sleep that night. Daniel didn't either. I could hear him moving around in the next room, his footsteps restless. The next morning we had breakfast together without speaking. Two strangers, two liars, we were both grieving things we couldn't say out loud. A girl who vanished with his heart, a boy who reminded me what it felt like to be seen, and both of us afraid to admit how far we'd fallen into something we couldn't fix. It wasn't just a beach trip anymore. It was a quiet war between guilt and desire, and neither of us was winning. We packed up the car in silence. The sea breeze that once felt freeing now stung my skin. Daniel didn't look at me, and I didn't force it. I could feel the tension between us. Raw stretched too thin. I kept waiting for him to say something, to ask to confess. But he didn't. Maybe he couldn't, or maybe he already knew everything and just chose silence over confrontation as we drove away from that coastal town. I stared out the window while the memories played on repeat, Ethan's hand in mine, his lips brushing my neck, his voice in the dark, saying, I wish I'd met you before life happened to you. That single sentence wrecked me more than any fight with my husband ever did. Daniel didn't ask why I'd been disappearing every afternoon. He didn't ask why my mood had shifted, why I seemed lighter one day and completely absent the next. He didn't ask, because he didn't want to know. That was our silent agreement a week after we returned home. I ended things with Ethan. Not because I stopped wanting him, but because the weight of what I had done was starting to change me. I couldn't look at Daniel without hearing Ethan's voice in the background. I couldn't live in two realities at once. I told Ethan goodbye in a message I never let him reply to. I blocked his number before I could change my mind. I cried for a boy who saw me clearly when I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Daniel never mentioned Lalo again. He stayed out late, sometimes didn't come home, and I didn't press him. I knew he was coping in the only way he could, with silence, with distance, with people I'd never meet and wouldn't ask about months past. My husband never noticed, or maybe he did and didn't care. Our lives had become polite routines, meals, greetings, beds, shared without warmth. We went through the motions, and it was almost worse than fighting one night.